Alrighty. If you can't already tell by the note sheet in front of you, we are looking at solving radical equations today. So we have 4 steps here. The steps are outlined for you. Step number 1, make sure that the radical is isolated or by itself. Step 2 is to square both sides of the equation to eliminate the radical sign. 3 is to solve the remaining equation, and number 4 there is to check for extraneous solutions. So the first thing that we're going to look at is this word extraneous. We haven't seen it before. Extraneous solutions are solutions that when plugged or substituted into the original equation don't work. So we always kind of try to tell you ways that you can check your solution. So if you're not sure how to solve something, we always say, well, when you get done, when you get your answer, you can plug it back in and check to make sure that it works. So we're going to use kind of that method to make sure that we don't have any solutions that don't work. So we're going to do some different problems here today. Number 1, we're going to go through our steps. Make sure the radical is isolated. So if I'm looking at this, is there anything else surrounding the radical sign? Like, is there anything being multiplied to the radical? Is there anything being added to the radical? No. The radical is all by itself. This is what you are looking for. You're looking for the radical to end up like this at some point. So once we get the radical isolated, step number 2 is to square both sides of the equation. So to undo our radical sign, we would have to square, which means that I'm going to have to take both sides and raise it to the second power. So I'm putting a little exponent of 2 there. Now the only thing that 2 does to this square root over here is it eliminates it. So the little 2 and the square root are gone, making that an x. Now I have to figure out what is 9 squared. Well, if I take 9 and I square it, I get 81. And that's my solution. Okay? But I always want to go back to step 4 and check to make sure that that 81 is indeed a possible solution. So I'm going to plug it in where x was in the original equation. So I'm going to take square root of 81. And the square root of 81 would equal 9. So that equation works. That's what I want. Let's take a look at number 2. We're going to just keep adding a little bit to this each time. Is the radical all by itself? Okay. Now the one thing you have to look at here is that yes, there's more underneath the radical, but is there anything actually multiplied or added to the radical itself? Okay, because the plus 5 that's here is actually underneath the radical sign, so actually that's all combined under the radical. There's nothing added or subtracted to this or multiplied by it. So technically my radical is all alone right now. So then I'm going to do the same thing that I did over here in order to solve it. In order for me to get rid of a square root, I have to square it here, and if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. So that little 2, all it does is get rid of my square root sign, leaving me with the m plus 5 underneath. And then I have my 2 squared over here, and if I take 2 squared, I get 4. And how would I go about finishing this problem to get m by itself? Subtract 5. So then I would get m is equal to -1. And so then I want to make sure that that is indeed a solution. So I'm going to plug that back into the original equation. So I have -1 plus 5, and that should equal 2. Well, -1 plus 5, that equals 4. Does the square root of 4 equal 2? Then this indeed is a solution. Okay? Number 3, is the radical all by itself? Is there anything being added or multiplied or anything to the radical? No. You see some multiplication, but is the multiplication on the outside of the radical or on the inside? Since it's on the inside of the radical, nothing's actually being done to the radical. If it was on the outside, that's when we would have to worry about it. So then, same thing. How am I going to get rid of the radical? I'm going to square that side, which means I'm going to square the other side. What do I get when I take 6 squared? 36. What happens over here when I square the square root? It goes away, so all I'm left with is everything that's underneath that square root. And then how would I finish solving this problem? Divide by 4, which would give me a y that is equal to 9. Okay, the rest of this is just kind of different operations, and all the radicals on the rest of this page are all by themselves. So let's go ahead and take a look at the back of this. Let's take a look at number 7. Looking at number 7, is the radical all alone? Okay, so is this the only thing that shows up on that side? Okay, notice how that top of that radical sign only extends past the x. It does not extend over the 7. Since it doesn't extend all the way over the 7, that 7 is not included with the radical, which means that before I do anything with that radical, I have to get rid of everything that's around it. So how am I going to eliminate that 7 that's sitting right there? Okay, I'm going to do the opposite, which means I have to add it. And if I add it to one side, I have to add it to the other. So that is going to get rid of that negative 7 sitting there. Then I'm just going to drop down that square root of x. Negative 6 plus 7, that gives me a positive 1. How do I get rid of the square root? Square it. I usually put parentheses to indicate what I'm squaring. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. I get x is equal to 1. Okay? Number 8. Is the radical all by itself in number 8? No. What is being done to my radical right now? You have multiplication. You have that negative 10 on the outside. That indicates multiplication. So I have to get rid of that multiplication first before I start solving the rest of the problem. So how am I going to get rid of the multiplication of that 10 out front? Divide. Yep, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 10. That's going to get rid of that 10 out front, leaving me with the square root of n. And then all I have to do on this side is negative 50 divided by negative 10, and that gets me positive 5. And then I have to come over here. I have to get rid of that square root, so I'm going to square it. If I square it, I have to square the other side. That gets rid of everything over there, so I'm left with just n. And then 5 squared would give me 25, and I'm done. Okay? The only thing that's going to get more complicated than that is that we're going to have multiple things happening. I'm going to have addition and multiplication. And I'm going to have some things on the inside and on the outside of the radical. So what I would like you to do for the rest of class today is to finish the problems we haven't done up to number 12. Okay, all we have to finish is up to number 12.